An ordinary neighbor could become the most dangerous person in the village. But how did entire communities become convinced that the witch lived next door? Today, most people think of witches as characters from fairy tales, but 100 years ago, millions of people believed they were real. Not because they were foolish, but because they lived in a world where almost every disaster demanded an explanation. Disease could appear without warning. A healthy child could suddenly become sick. A violent storm could destroy an entire harvest, and no one could explain why. Most people believed that God and the devil could both influence everyday life. When disaster struck, people believed someone had caused it. The only question was, who? And sometimes they found that answer in the house next door. But if witches looked like everyone else, how did an ordinary neighbor become a suspected witch? A witch didn't look like a witch. There was no pointed head, no flying broom, and no green skin. Most looked like ordinary people, which meant they could be anyone. Not a stranger, someone you already knew. A neighbor, a friend, someone you had known for years. Although most of those accused were women, men and even children could also be accused of witchcraft. Yet, accusations rarely fell at random. Some people, however, were more vulnerable than others. Older women, widows, people living alone, those who lived on the edge of community, and in some places, healers and midwives. Not because they were witches, but because they often had fewer people willing to defend them when suspicion began. An animal suddenly died, a child became sick, harvest failed, or two neighbors had an argument. When something went wrong, people searched for an explanation, and sometimes their suspicion settled on someone they already knew. Once that happened, every strange coincidence seemed to confirm their fears. But suspicion wasn't enough. It still had to become evidence. But how could anyone prove that their neighbor was really a witch? An ordinary neighbor. People began looking for signs, not because they had evidence, but because they believed the evidence had to exist somewhere. So they started looking everywhere. One of the first things to become suspicious wasn't a weapon, it was medicine. Healing herbs became suspicious. The same knowledge that could heal was also believed to cause harm. One ordinary animal became one of history's most feared symbols, not because it harmed people, but because of what people believed it followed. A black cat was feared in some places. Its strange eyes, its silent movements, and the belief that witches kept animal companions made it seem unnatural. Even preparing dinner could become suspicious. An ordinary cooking cauldron used to prepare meals, heat water, or brew herbs was suddenly seen differently. Its ordinary contents became imagined as magical potions, and then one ordinary household tool became the symbol of witchcraft itself. Even an ordinary broom used in every day inside the home eventually became one of history's most recognizable symbols of witchcraft. Folklore eventually claimed that witches could fly through the night on their brooms. None of these things proved that someone was a witch, they only became suspicious. After someone already had been accused, the evidence didn't create the accusation. The accusation created the evidence, but objects alone couldn't send someone to their death. A court still had to believe them. But how did they decide who lived and who died? Once an accusation reached the authorities, everything changed. A suspicion was no longer enough. The court wanted proof. The problem was, almost no one knew what proof of witchcraft should actually look like. So investigators began searching for signs. Many believed every witch carried physical evidence. The question was, where? Some believed the devil left a mark on every witch. A mole, a scar, even a birthmark could become suspicious. In some regions, investigators searched for these marks. In some regions, investigators pushed needles into these marks. If a mark didn't bleed or seemed painless, they believed they had found evidence. Other investigators believed nature itself would reveal the truth. In other places, the accused were thrown into water. Many believed that pure water would reject a witch. If they floated, they were considered guilty. If they sank, they might be innocent. But surviving was another matter. Some investigators even believed a witch could be identified by her weight. Not every court accepted these methods, but in a Dutch town of Oudewater, the famous witch kill often did the opposite. It helped clear the accused, instead of condemning them. When none of these methods produced a confession, some courts turned into torture. Many confessions were not freely given. They were extracted under unbearable pressure. And once someone confessed, that confession often became the strongest evidence of all. For many, the verdict meant death. Once the court believed, there was often no way back. If a single accusation could end like this, how did thousands more follow across Europe? The trials didn't remain in a single village. They didn't even remain within one kingdom. They spread across much of Europe. But the fear didn't look the same everywhere. Not every region experienced the hunts in the same way. Some areas saw only a handful of accusations. Others experienced hundreds or even thousands. The punishments also differed from region to region. In some places, execution meant burning. In others, it meant hanging. What began as isolated accusations eventually became one of Europe's largest waves of mass persecution. Historians estimated between 80,000 and 100,000 people were accused of witchcraft. Around half were executed. Fear didn't spread alone. Ideas spread with it. Printed books described witches and how to identify them. Traveling judges carried legal practices from one region to another. Religious conflict and social unrest made communities even more willing to believe that hidden enemies lived among them. Eventually, the hunts began to fade. Courts demanded stronger evidence. Skepticism slowly replaced fear. Yet today, one name overshadows almost all the others. Why does almost everyone remember only Salem? Salem wasn't the largest witch trial in history. It wasn't the first, so why did it become the most famous? In 1692, at the small town of Salem, Massachusetts, several young girls began suffering unexplained fits and strange behavior. Fear spread quickly. Soon, accusations followed. More than 200 people were accused. 19 were executed. One man was pressed to death beneath heavy stones. But something began to change. Even some judges and religious leaders start questioning the evidence. Spectral evidence, once accepted, gradually lost its credibility. The trials came to an end. Salem became the symbol of the witch hunts, not because it was the largest, but because its records survived. Its testimony survived and history never forgot. But perhaps the real lesson was never about witches. Looking back, the greatest danger was never witchcraft itself. It was fear. Fear searching for an explanation. and fear searching for someone to blame. Ordinary neighbors became suspects. Simple objects became evidence. Rumors became convictions, and suspicion became a death sentence. Today we know witches were never the real threat. But history reminds us that when fear becomes stronger than evidence, ordinary people can still become extraordinary enemies. And perhaps that is why the story of the witch next door still matters today. Some doors were never meant to be opened. This is the Backtrack Vault. Subscribe and step deeper into the unknown.